So here's what happened 45,000 years before Christ, in a place where the world was so cold that breathing felt like swallowing knives. Picture the Altai Mountains, towering above valleys locked in ice for 8 months of every year. This is where we meet Kira, maybe 14 years old, watching her grandmother work a wolf hide in the smoke lodge. And when I say work, I mean the kind of grinding, brutal labor that most of us can't even imagine. Her grandmother's hands are bleeding, not a little cut here or there, but deep cracks that won't heal because she's been scraping hides for 3 straight days. 3 days for one hide. That's what it took back then, and that was the price of survival. The sound filled the lodge, this rhythmic scraping of stone against skin, steady as a heartbeat. Outside, you could hear the wolves getting closer every night, their howls echoing off the valley walls. And Kira's baby sister, she's shivering under a fur that's so worn you can practically see through it. Too young to understand that her mother is working 18 hours a day just to keep 5 children from freezing to death. Now we need to talk about the technique itself, because this matters. The traditional method wasn't just tradition for tradition's sake. It was perfection born from necessity, passed down through 100 generations of women who knew that one mistake meant death. You held your scraper at exactly 45 degrees, not 44, not 46, 45. Too much pressure, and the hide tears, and you've just wasted 3 days plus the life of whatever animal gave that hide. Too little pressure, and you leave the membrane on, and within days the whole thing rots from the inside, the fur falling out in clumps. So you learned the angle, and you never varied it. Ever. But here's where desperation changes everything. A blizzard traps the tribe for 7 days. Not the kind of storm where you stay inside and feel cozy, the kind where people start dying. Kira's grandmother is too sick to work. The children are starting to show blue lips, that deep cold that means you're running out of time. And Kira, she's looking at her family, at her baby sister. And she's thinking there has to be a better way. She takes an obsidian scraper from her uncle's tool cache, just steals it, because she knows he'd never let her experiment with something so valuable. And then she does something that 10,000 years of accumulated wisdom says you should never do. She changes the angle, tilts it from 45 degrees to 70, and here's the thing that changes human history. The membrane peels away like bark from a tree, clean, whole, perfect. 3 days of work, done in one. Imagine that moment. You're 14 years old, you've just broken the most fundamental rule of your society's most essential craft, and you're holding proof that everything everyone has ever known is wrong. What do? Kira shows her grandmother. And the old woman, she drops her scraper, just lets it fall to the ground in shock. Because she understands immediately what this means. Not just for their family, not just for their tribe, but for everything. The word spreads through the lodge like fire through dry grass. Women abandon their workstations. They crowd around to watch Kira demonstrate the technique again. And again. Each time, the same result. The hide is not just faster, it's actually softer than traditional preparation, better quality in 1/3 of the time. But innovation is never simple, is it? The clan mother shows up, and she's not happy. She's suspicious of anything that challenges 10,000 years of doing things a certain way. She's also the gatekeeper of knowledge, the authority figure whose power comes from controlling who learns what and when, so she demands proof. A race, Kira against the tribe's master hide worker. Picture this scene. The whole community gathered around. The master worker, probably in her 40s, confident in skills refined over decades. And Kira, this teenager who 3 days ago didn't even have her own scraper. The race begins. Stone on skin, that rhythmic sound multiplied by 2. Kira finishes 2 perfect hides while the master worker completes 1. The political earthquake starts immediately. The established workers, the women who control training and hold social power because of their expertise, they see their entire authority structure threatened. If a 14-year-old can outwork a master, what does that say about their position? What happens to their status, their influence, their ability to decide who learns and when. But the younger women, they see something different. They see opportunity. They see the possibility of not spending 18 hours a day just to keep children from freezing. They see time for something other than survival. By morning, half the lodge has switched to Kira's angle. Just like that, 10,000 years of tradition, overturned in a single night because the mathematics are undeniable. You can be loyal to tradition, or you can be warm. Most people choose warm. What strikes me about this moment is how close it came to never happening. If the blizzard had been 6 days instead of 7, maybe Kira doesn't get desperate enough to experiment. If her grandmother hadn't been sick, maybe the traditional method would have been enough. If the clan mother had been more forceful in her opposition, maybe the innovation gets suppressed. History turns on these tiny moments, these individual choices made by people whose names we'll never know. Except in this case, we're calling her Kira, and what she did that night changed everything. Because here's what nobody in that smoke lodge could have known. They were standing at the beginning of a revolution that would echo across 45,000 years. That 70-degree angle would spread across continents, enable the settlement of the coldest places on Earth, and create the saved time that would allow humanity to become something more than desperate survivors, scraping hides to stay alive one more winter. But that night, in that valley, it was simpler than world historical change. It was a girl holding a scraper at a different angle, trying to save her baby sister from the cold. The following summer changes everything. Once a year, 8 tribes gather at what will one day become the Yenisei River, though nobody calls it that yet. It's just the big river, the place where you can trade amber for obsidian, dried fish for worked hides, stories for stories. Picture 300 people camped along the riverbank, the largest gathering most of them will see in their entire lives. And here comes Kira, 16 now, carrying her distinctive scraper and a reputation that's travelled faster than she has. The demonstration happens on the 3rd day of the gathering, after the formal trades but before the summer hunting parties split off. Someone brings her a fresh bear hide, massive thing that would traditionally take a week of hard work. Kira sets up in the centre of the camp where everyone can see. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. Work stops. Conversations pause. 300 people form a circle around this teenager with a scraper. 4 hours later, she's done. Perfect bear hide, ready for use. The sound that goes up from that crowd, it's this collective gasp that echoes across the valley. You have to understand what they're seeing. It's like watching someone break the laws of physics. Everything they know about how the world works, everything their mothers and grandmothers taught them, it's all wrong. And the proof is right there in front of them, this beautiful bear hide that shouldn't exist yet. The traditional master workers, they're furious. These are people whose entire identity, whose social standing, whose ability to feed their families comes from being the best at this essential craft. And now some kid is making them look like amateurs. So they do what threatened power always does. They attack the innovation itself. The method is cursed, they say. It disturbs the spirit of the animal. The hides won't last through winter. The technique will bring bad luck to anyone who uses it. But then someone, probably one of the younger workers who's tired of the old guard's control, issues a challenge. Match her output. Show us the traditional method is better. And they can't. They simply cannot keep up. The best traditional worker there, a woman who's been preparing hides for 30 years, she tries. Everyone watches as she works with perfect technique, the 45-degree angle precise as always, and Kira finishes 3 hides while the master completes 1. Now here's where the economics get interesting, because that's really what drives revolutionary change, isn't it? The mathematics are brutal and simple. One worker using Kira's method can produce clothing for 6 people annually instead of 2. Think about what that means for a tribe of 40 people. Under the old system, you need 7 workers doing nothing but hide preparation just to keep everyone clothed. With the new method, you need 2. That's 5 people freed up to hunt, gather, make tools, care for children, or just exist without bleeding from their hands every single day. The strategic alliances form fast. The River Clan, They're sharp traders who immediately see the value. They offer 20 pounds of salmon, which is enormous wealth, for exclusive training rights. The mountain tribe comes forward with obsidian from the volcanic peaks, the best tool-making material in the region. They want to send their daughters to learn. But Kira makes a choice that I think reveals something profound about human nature at its best. She could have become rich. She could have controlled access to this knowledge, parceled it out to the highest bidders, built an empire of influence. Instead, she tells everyone gathered that she'll teach anyone who brings food for her family. That's it. That's the price. A few days' worth of food, and she'll spend however long it takes to make sure you understand the technique. Some people think she's foolish. Why give away something so valuable? But Kira understands something the traders don't. The more people who know this method, the stronger everyone becomes against the ice. When your neighbor's children don't freeze, when the tribe up the valley can survive the hard winters, that makes your world more stable, more survivable. The innovation isn't valuable because it's rare. It's valuable because it works, and it works better when everyone has it. Within 2 seasons, variations of the technique spread across 500 miles of territory. And this is where it gets really fascinating, because innovation breeds innovation. Each tribe that learns the method starts experimenting, adding their own refinements. The forest people discover that if you apply birch oil to the hide first, Kira's angle becomes even more effective. The membrane slides off like water on a leaf. The grassland hunters develop a 2-person variant where one person holds the hide taut while another scrapes. Doubles the speed again, but not everyone is celebrating. In the valleys of what will eventually be Kazakhstan, the traditional craft guilds are powerful and organized. They see this innovation as an existential threat, and they respond with violence. They burn the tools of anyone using the new method. 3 women are exiled for teaching it against the elders' prohibition. The message is clear: stick to tradition or leave. Then winter arrives early, harsh even by Ice Age standards. The temperatures drop so fast that people don't have time to prepare properly. And here's where the rubber meets the road, as they say. The innovative tribes, the ones who've adopted Kira's method, they have enough clothing. Their children are warm. Their hunters can range out even in the worst cold because they're lithe, properly equipped. The traditional tribes lose half their children to cold. Half. You can enforce tradition all you want, but you can't argue with dead children. The following spring, even the most conservative clans send representatives to learn. The guild leaders who burned tools 6 months ago, they're quietly showing up at camps where Kira's students are teaching, trying to learn without admitting they were wrong. Pride is a luxury you can afford when your children aren't freezing. The technique spreads along trade routes like a language, like fire, like an idea whose time has come. Amber traders heading to the Baltic carry it north. Mammoth hunters traveling the Siberian plains take it east. Bands moving along what will become the Danube bring it west toward the edges of glaciated Europe. And everywhere it goes, it transforms. The basic 70-degree angle remains, but the grip varies. The rhythm changes. Some people work standing, others sitting. Some sing while they work, others prefer silence. Within a generation, it reaches the edges of the ice sheets. 20 years after Kira held her scraper at a new angle in a desperate bid to save her sister, you can walk 5,000 miles and find women using variations of her technique. Most of them have never heard her name. They just know this is how you prepare hides. This is how it's done. This is how it's always been done. Which is the ultimate triumph of an innovation, isn't it? When it becomes invisible. When it stops being the new way and simply becomes the way. When nobody remembers that things were ever different. But they were different. And the difference between the old way and the new way is the difference between 18 hours of bleeding hands and 6 hours of productive work. It's the difference between survival and something that might, just might, become more than survival. 20 years after Kira's discovery, the world looks different. Not the mountains or the ice or the wolves. Those are the same. But the human world, the social landscape, it's been completely transformed, And the change starts with something we take for granted now, but was revolutionary then: free time. Women now spend 8 hours a day on essential clothing production instead of 18. 8 hours instead of 18. Let that sink in for a moment. That's 10 hours returned to each person, every single day. 10 hours that used to disappear into the grinding necessity of not freezing to death. Now here's the question. What do you do with 10 extra hours when you've never had 10 extra hours before? You create, you decorate, you make things beautiful. This is when we see humanity's first leisure class emerge. And I don't mean leisure in the modern sense of lying on a beach. I mean time that isn't dedicated to immediate survival. Time to think about something other than will we eat today? Will we stay warm tonight? Will the children live through winter? And in that saved time, something remarkable happens. The earliest decorative arts flourish. Women start pressing geometric patterns into leather, just for beauty. Not because it makes the leather stronger or warmer, because it looks nice. They add fringes that serve absolutely no functional purpose except to move prettily when you walk. They begin dyeing furs using ochre and manganese, creating reds and blacks and browns that have nothing to do with camouflage or practicality. Everything to do with self-expression. Archaeological sites from this period tell the story clearly. There's this sudden explosion in decorated items. Before Kira's innovation, you find maybe one decorated piece for every 100 utilitarian ones. After, it's 1 in 5, then 1 in 3. The sites also show something else. Social gatherings grow larger and more frequent. When you're not working 18 hours a day, you have time to visit neighbors, to travel to other settlements, to actually talk to people who aren't your immediate family. The first specialized roles emerge beyond basic survival. Someone becomes known as particularly good at creating those geometric patterns. Another person develops a reputation for mixing the best dyes. A third specializes in the decorative fringes. These aren't full-time jobs yet, but they're the beginning of professional specialization. The beginning of someone being valued for something other than their ability to hunt or gather or prepare hides for survival. But the innovation triggers cascade effects through every aspect of society, not just the artistic ones. Better-clothed hunting parties can range farther into frozen territories. When you're properly dressed, when you're not constantly on the edge of hypothermia, you can travel for days into regions that would have killed you before. And in these extended ranges, they discover new valley settlements, new mountain passes, new territories that can support human life. The crossing clan establishes something unprecedented: the first permanent trading post. Not a seasonal gathering, but a place where people live year-round specifically to facilitate trade. They exchange finished furs for raw materials for finished furs. They become intermediaries, specialists in connection, and they can only do this because the clothing production efficiency means not everyone needs to be producing clothing anymore. Population densities double in cold regions. The carrying capacity of the land hasn't changed. There's still only so many mammoths, so many edible plants, so much game. But the human capacity to survive on those resources has increased dramatically. Children survive winters that would have killed them before. Families grow larger because they can actually keep more children alive. The territorial expansion happens fast. Valleys that could support 20 people can now support 40. Regions that were marginal become viable. And here's where we start to see the first professional class emerge. Master, hide workers who produce luxury items rather than necessities. These are people who've taken Kira's method and refined it to an art form. They're not making basic survival clothing anymore. They're making statement pieces, elaborate decorative furs for wealthy traders, specially prepared hides for ceremonial purposes, items that cost 5 times as much as standard clothing because they're 5 times as beautiful. The spiritual beliefs shift too, because they always do when the material conditions of life change. The fur goddess enters pantheons from Siberia to Scandinavia. She's always depicted the same way, holding a scraper at a distinctive angle, 70 degrees, though the people drawing her don't think of it in degrees. They just know it's Kira's angle, the sacred angle, the angle that saved humanity from the cold. Coming-of-age ceremonies transform. Before, they were about demonstrating basic survival skills. Can you find food? Can you make fire? Can you prepare a hide well enough to not freeze? Now they center specifically on mastering the technique. Young women prove their readiness for marriage by preparing a complete set of winter clothes in 3 days, not 18 days like their great-grandmothers needed. 3 days, and the quality has to be perfect. The saved time allows for longer storytelling sessions. When you're not falling into bed exhausted after 18 hours of labor, you can sit around the fire and talk. Share stories, pass down knowledge. The oral traditions deepen. Stories that would have been lost to the daily struggle for warmth, they get preserved, refined, elaborated. This is when we start to see the complex mythologies that will characterize human culture for the next 40,000 years. Music develops in a new way. Women have always sung while working, but now the work sessions are shorter and there are more people participating. The rhythmic work songs emerge, timed to the scraping of stone on hide. These songs will echo through 40,000 years of human culture, changing form but maintaining that essential rhythm, the rhythm of stone on skin, the rhythm of survival becoming something more than survival. The new social structures create tensions too. The old hierarchies based on traditional expertise have collapsed. The new hierarchies based on innovation and efficiency are still forming. Some people thrive in this environment. Others, particularly those who gained status under the old system, struggle to find their place. There are generational conflicts, the elderly remembering when things were done properly, the traditional way. The young impatient with anything that slows progress. But mostly, people are warmer. They have time to think, time to create, time to be human in ways that go beyond the animal necessity of staying alive one more day. Their children survive, their art flourishes, their communities grow stronger and more connected. 20 years after a desperate girl changed the angle of her scraper, the human world has expanded, not geographically yet, though that's coming, but socially, culturally, spiritually. The innovation has created space. Space for thought, for beauty, for connection. Space for humanity to become something more complex and interesting than it was before. And Kira, now in her mid-30s, watches all of this unfold. She sees her technique become tradition. She sees the fur goddess depicted with her scraper. She sees young women competing to prove their mastery of what she invented in desperation on a winter night. Does she understand the magnitude of what she started? Probably not fully, but she knows her baby sister is alive, her children are warm, and that was the point, wasn't it? Kira dies at 52, which is remarkable for the Ice Age. Most people don't make it past 35, but she's surrounded by 8 children and 34 grandchildren when she goes, and every single one of them is wearing furs prepared with her method. Actually, by then it's not her method anymore. It's just the method, the way things are done. The way things have always been done, as far as most people remember. Nobody talks about the old way. The 45-degree angle has passed out of living memory. The 18-hour workdays, the bleeding hands, the children who froze because there wasn't enough clothing to go around. That's ancient history now. Stories that old people tell about the bad old days. And Kira's innovation has become invisible, which is the ultimate success of any innovation. It's not the new way anymore. It's not even Kira's way. It's just how you prepare a hide, obviously. Her descendants carry a distinctive bone scraper, passed down through generations. It becomes a mark of lineage, this particular tool, with its worn edge and the pattern carved into the handle. Her grandchildren and great-grandchildren become traveling teachers, spreading refinements across continents. They're respected everywhere they go, not because of who their grandmother was, but because they're the best at what they do. The technique has evolved beyond what Kira invented, incorporating all those regional variations and improvements, but it still carries her essential insight. Change the angle. Change everything. Around 35,000 years before Christ, the technique crosses the Bering Land Bridge, bands of hunters following mammoth herds into the New World, and they could never have survived that Arctic crossing without improved clothing technology. The temperatures on that ice bridge are lethal. You need perfect gear, multiple layers, knowledge refined through generations. Kira's 70-degree angle makes that crossing possible. Without it, the Americas remain empty. The whole Western Hemisphere stays uninhabited, while the Eastern Hemisphere develops alone. Think about that for a moment. The entire history of the Americas, every civilization that will rise there, every innovation and culture and empire, it all depends on clothing good enough to cross an ice bridge. And that clothing depends on a method invented by a teenager trying to keep her baby sister warm. The mathematical impact compounds through generations in ways nobody could have predicted. Each saved hour multiplies through thousands of workers. Millions of hours redirected to innovation, art, expansion. Tribes that master the technique early gain evolutionary advantages, not because they're smarter or stronger, but because they have time. Time to think, time to plan, time to develop the tools and strategies that will let them outcompete their neighbors. Their populations grow faster. When more children survive, when families can support more people, the population expands geometrically. Their territories expand farther because they can range into colder regions. Their genetic lines dominate because they're simply more successful at surviving and reproducing. Over thousands of years, these advantages compound. The descendants of early adopters spread across continents, while populations that stuck with traditional methods remain confined to narrow territories. The innovation enables humanity's conquest of the planet's coldest regions. Without Kira's angle, there would be no Inuit cultures developing along the Arctic coast, no Sami people herding reindeer across Scandinavia, no complex societies on the Mongolian steppes. The Arctic remains empty. Siberia stays unexplored, the Americas unreachable. The human story unfolds in a much smaller geographic area, with all the limitations that implies. Modern indigenous peoples from Alaska to Greenland still use variations of the 70-degree angle. I find this remarkable. 45,000 years of cultural change, countless innovations and adaptations, and this fundamental technique persists. The people using it have no idea where it came from. It's not like there's an oral tradition saying, "This is Kira's angle," passed down from the ancient times. It's just how you do it, how you've always done it, how your mother taught you and her mother taught her. But electron microscope analysis of ancient tools reveals the truth. Archaeologists studying wear patterns on stone scrapers from 45,000 years ago, they find something interesting. The wear doesn't match what you'd expect from a 45-degree angle. It matches a 70-degree angle. The tools tell the story that memory has forgotten. One woman's desperate innovation became humanity's universal practice. In museums from Moscow to Montreal, you can see these 45,000-year-old scrapers. They look primitive to modern eyes, just shaped stones, really. But if you know what to look for, you can see the distinctive edge wear. The pattern that only makes sense if the user was holding the tool at that specific angle. Kira's angle. The physical evidence survives even when the story doesn't. Computer models suggest something even more profound. Researchers trying to understand Ice Age population dynamics, they run simulations. What if clothing production efficiency had remained at traditional levels? What if nobody had ever figured out the 70-degree angle? The models suggest that human populations in cold climates would have remained 90% smaller. 90%. That's not a minor difference. That's the difference between marginally viable and genuinely thriving. And 90% smaller populations means completely altered history. Smaller populations generate fewer innovations. They control less territory. They have less genetic diversity. They're more vulnerable to catastrophes. The whole trajectory of human development shifts. Maybe we never leave Africa in significant numbers. Maybe we never develop the complex toolkits and social structures that characterize modern humans. Maybe we remain one species, among many, ecologically successful but not dominant. The last mammoth hunters depended on Kira's innovation. They needed clothing good enough to track herds across frozen continents, to camp in sub-zero temperatures for weeks at a time. The first reindeer herders needed it too. You can't spend months following herds through Arctic conditions without superior cold weather gear. The builders of Ice Age Europe's great caves, the people who created the magnificent art at Lascaux and Altamira and Chauvet, they all depended on having enough time and energy left over from basic survival to create something beautiful. That time came from more efficient clothing production. So, here's what strikes me about this whole story. We tend to think of history's great turning points as dramatic moments: wars and revolutions, the rise and fall of empires, technological breakthroughs that everyone recognizes as important. But sometimes history turns on something quieter. A young woman holding a scraper at a different angle on a desperate winter night, trying to save her sister, trying to keep her family warm. She doesn't know she's changing human history. She's just trying to survive. But her innovation ripples forward through time, enabling everything that comes after. The settlement of new continents, the development of complex societies in harsh climates, the survival of populations that would have died without better clothing. All of it traces back to that moment when Kira thought, what if I try a different angle? The great innovations often look tiny in the moment. They're not grand gestures or brilliant flashes of inspiration. They're desperate attempts to solve immediate problems. But they persist, they spread, they compound. And 45,000 years later, people across the Arctic are still using variations of a technique invented by a girl whose name we don't actually know, in a place we can't precisely identify, to solve a problem that we can barely imagine. But the innovation survives. The technique persists. The evidence remains in museums and microscopes, and the living practices of people who have no idea they're inheriting a gift from the Ice Age. And that's the real legacy, isn't it? Not fame or recognition or historical memory, but the quiet persistence of a good idea passed down through so many generations that nobody remembers it was ever new. Kira held her scraper differently. And everything changed.